There is new polling that reveals the priorities of Republican voters in 2024, and it is utterly and fundamentally cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. The modern American conservative movement is focused on some really wild stuff. CBS News poll on how 2024 Republican presidential primary race could be Trump versus Trump fatigue. This is super interesting at this early stage of the primary. The CBS News article reads, to the extent the Republican primary is a contest at all right now, it looks like it's one between Trump and a sentiment one might call Trump fatigue, and Trump is winning that matchup easily. Here's why. MAGA-sounding ideas are widely held in the Republican electorate, an environment that plays heavily to Trump's advantage. There's big demand for a candidate who says Trump won in 2020, who challenges woke ideas, who doesn't criticize Trump, and for good measure makes liberals angry. Trump leads in all of those areas. Meanwhile, there are some Republicans who say they're exhausted by Trump and he's too controversial, but they are greatly outnumbered today. Check this out. Top answers from likely Republican primary voters. These are folks who, based on their answers, have been categorized as likely to vote in the primary. Primary, remember, that's a critically important detail. 2024 Republican nomination. Likely Republican primary voters prefer a candidate who 85% challenges woke ideas. Oh boy. 66% opposes any gun restrictions. 61% say Trump won the 2020 election. And 57% makes liberals angry. Now, there are two layers within which this is interesting. The first layer is Republicans for so long have been insisting we care about issues of importance to all Americans, economic issues, jobs, inflation, something like that. We're supposed to believe that's what they care about. When you look at the polls, the likely Republican primary voters care about very different things. The most interesting part of this is that these interests are likely to lead to a Republican candidate that is out of step with the country as a whole. Let me explain what I mean by that. When Trump was arrested and his approval went up among Republican primary voters, one of the things we saw, we surmised, we noticed, is that while it is likely to help Trump in the primary by energizing his base because he's been treated so unfairly, the whole thing, it's not likely to get him any new votes in the general election. And similarly, when we looked at Ron DeSantis potentially running an anti-woke campaign, while that plays relatively well with Republican primary voters, when you survey the country as a whole, wokeness, for lack of a better term, is actually the more popular position. And similarly, when you look at some of these things, if 85% of likely Republican primary voters want a candidate that challenges woke ideas, but roughly 57 to 60% of the country sides with wokeness on trans issues and on so many other issues, you have a scenario in which the person that Republicans are most likely to select to represent them in November of 2024 is not actually the person most likely to win that general election. Now, this isn't news to us. When you look at polling that does primary and then does hypothetical general election matchup, you see Trump does really well in the primary, but loses to Biden, generally speaking, on average, loses to Biden in the November election. So there's a few layers where this is interesting. One, it confirms that not just Republicans in general, because you could be a Republican who plans to vote in November of 24, but you're not engaged enough to vote in the primary. So this really is likely primary voters. The likely primary electorate of the Republican Party is very much out of step with the way that the country as a whole is going. That's number one. And then number two, we've said for a while now, Republican elected officials, Republican candidates, better said, have abandoned policy in part because they're losing the country on policy. So instead, they talk about this sort of stuff. Let's do nothing on guns. let's fight wokeness, let's ban books, let's stop drag shows, whatever else the case may be. That is in itself also not apparently a winning ideology or a winning platform. They've lost on policy, so they've abandoned it and they've moved on to cultural issues, but they're also not winning the cultural issues nationally. And yesterday we looked at how they're losing on abortion and in other areas. So what are they to do? The answer is obvious. It's what they've been doing. You try to win elections by saying you won, even if you lost. And that should really scare all of us, because it means they will almost certainly try it again in 2024.